Welcome back to Critical Moves podcast. I'm Adam, and today I'm joined by Nuno
Hello, everyone.
and Jack.
Hello, everyone.
And how are you guys? What are you playing right now? Anything interesting?
I can begin. I have been playing the Definitive Edition for Dawn of War. I just finished reviewing that one, and as someone who never played the original, 2004 original, I'm finding the campaign to be quite amazing, and it's incredible how a game like it's 21 years old now still holds up extremely well today. Just with a couple of updates on the graphics and the HUD, and the game is just perfect.
And does it include the DLCs?
Yeah. The game has everything. I think those were 4 DLCs, but I know the game brings everything in a nice package. And if you have the anniversary, I'm not sure if it's the anniversary edition, but if you have the base game of the original on Steam, you can get it for cheaper, around $18 or $20, something like that. Great game. I can see why people enjoy that.
Yeah, let's see if they enjoyed the Dawn of War 4. But maybe not. Let's not discuss it today. And Jack, what have you been playing recently?
I've been playing a lot of Civilization 6 recently.
Okay, not 7.
No, not 7. No.
Okay. And
Why not 7?
Well, I truthfully hadn't played a lot of Civilization 6 over the years compared to everyone else here on the channel. And when Civ 7 came out and we reviewed it pretty poorly, I stuck by that and the other journalistic news sources that I had read, and there just wasn't a reason for me to jump to 7 as somebody who hasn't really played Civ much in recent years. And I've been playing Civ 6 multiplayer. A lot of my friends are in love with Civ 7 and they think that our podcast is wrong. They would have a word with you guys, and so they've been trying to convince me to buy Civ 7, but I can't justify it because it's like a $70 game. They keep trying to tell me to buy it anyways. So we've all been playing Civ 6, and I've been enjoying it. It's a lot of fun.
I've been stuck on Civ 4 since, I don't know, 2010, something like that. So I haven't moved on since Civ 4.
Yeah, my dad, he's the big Civ player of my family, and he has something like 6,000 hours on Civ 5, and he refuses to touch Civ 6 or 7.
Yeah, to be honest, I liked Civ. Like, I guess everyone has their own like Civ game. So for me, it's Civ 5. Although the UI for this game is awful. It's like the worst UI I've ever seen in a game, and it works like okay, let's call it like a shit. But again, I feel that Civ 6 is better. But to be honest, I've never like, basically I always went back to Civ 5, so that's case for me. Okay guys, so let's get back to the topic. So today we are going to talk about community supported games, especially games that are being abandoned, that were abandoned by developers, and that are being held and keep alive by community. Basically, what I thought is that we should split this topic into 2 parts. The games that are abandoned too soon because, I don't know, developers simply didn't have enough money to keep up with production, or it was a disappointment for a publisher, and the games that are simply old. So guys, are you playing any old game that basically developer abandoned long time ago and you are using strange mods to play it? Jack?
Can't say I'm playing any strategy games that are too old at the moment, but I recently have gone on GOG and I have a big list of strategy games I've never heard anybody talk about that I'm actually interested to explore more that way.
Oh, so which one, for example?
Ooh, let me pull up the list here. So on my list here on GOG, I've highlighted the Star Wolves games, the Star Wolves series. I'm not sure if either of you are familiar with those. There's also Hyperspeed is a very ancient strategy game. I'm sure that would piss somebody off to call that ancient. Halfway, Spacecom, Offworld, Resource Space.
Offworld is really cool game. I played it a lot with my friends, and I wouldn't say it's strategy game, it's more of like a trade market game. It's about destroying your opponent using pure capitalism in the worst form. But it's a really good game. So, and Nuno, any game that comes to your mind regarding old times?
I don't think my list is probably not very. How should I say that? Up to date. It's probably the best way to say it. But man, do I remember a couple of years ago playing things like Age of Empires, like the original Age of Empires, and it being a bitch to run on modern systems. So that was one of like the Age of Empires 2, actually, not the original. Sorry. In the same thing for Age of Mythology as well. And Red Alert also. Like these are not abandoned games, right? They were finished games when development ceased. But yeah, I just remember like this being quite a bit to boot up. Another game that I kept alive for way longer than I probably should have. It was Company of Heroes, because there was a ridiculous amount of mods for Company of Heroes as well. So I kept playing like the Blitzkrieg mode long before the game ran out of fashion and way into the life cycle of Company of Heroes 2. That's mostly because I didn't really have any other World War II strategy game I was enjoying at the time until Man of War came out, at least. So like from 2006, I think, when Company of Heroes came out, and after the release of the expansions in 2007, I think, I kept the game alive until like well into 2015, probably 16, just playing with mods. It's still one of my favorite games. I really enjoy Company of Heroes 1.
Oh yeah, so basically I made a short list about the games that are basically kept by a community, and you touched the two games, Age of Empires 2 and Command of Heroes. So because Age of Empires 2, it's this type of strange game that basically was abandoned. Community kept it, like they developed some mods and so on. Then publisher got back to the topic and basically updated it. Then again, it was abandoned again. And then there's the newest version of Age of Empires 2. And right now, I presume this is the most played RTS games like at this moment.
I think so.
When I see Steam charts, there are like the fourth installment of the series has a worse charts than the second one. So it's something, I guess.
That's because I think Age of Empires 2 is a really solid RTS that always had that niche of a community playing it. And as soon as that's actually great that you touch on that, because the team that developed I think it was not the definitive edition, but the HD edition or something like that, was the modding team that was working on keeping some of the bigger mods of the game alive, right? So yeah, it's interesting to see how games that, I mean, it's quite unfair to say that they were abandoned, because the game was clearly finished and it was a really solid game. Like Age of Empires is one of the best games ever made, period. But it's fun to see how it just went full circle 2 times, right? 3 now. It's just, the game came out, community kept it alive, developer and publisher picked it up, published again, community kept it alive, and then like you have the definitive edition of the game right now. So I would agree on that. Yeah, a lot. It's a shame they didn't do that for Company of Heroes. They should remake Company of Heroes 1.
So we see Command of Heroes as another side of the topic, because you have Command of Heroes 2, you have Command of Heroes 3, you have the first installment, and interesting part is that they basically port Command of Heroes 1 to every possible device. It's even on a Switch, it's on iOS, it's basically everywhere. And again, like I see that most of people still likes Command of Heroes 1 instead of 2 and 3 and play Command of Heroes 1. There was at some point there was even free-to-play game, I don't know if you're aware, Command of Heroes Online, but it was brought down because the developer couldn't make money on it. Have you heard about it?
I don't think so.
Yeah. So this is interesting topic. So again, this is the type of the game that publisher like, okay, they made second installment, let's leave the first one, and let's go back to the game's abandoned. So since every podcast I'm in, I always talk about Heroes of Might and Magic. So I don't know if you are aware that Heroes of Might and Magic 3 has pretty big mods at this moment happening. Are you playing Heroes of Might and Magic 3? Because I as far as I remember, Jack, you haven't been playing this game, and Nuno?
Not really, no.
basically at this point there's like a completely new faction brought up to the game, and there are HD mods. And this is also interesting topic because the producer produced HD mod for Heroes 3 and it was a disaster, so community took over and made a better one. Unfortunately, you need to speak Russian to install it, but it works. So this is an interesting topic. Also, I thought you brought the Command and Conquer games. And have you been playing these Red Alert games because you thought about the Red Alert online or only offline?
So the Red Alert games, I played Red Alert, but I haven't been playing it recently, I think. But is the game still kept alive by the community on that one?
Yes. Yes, there's a site called CNC Online that you install a special launcher and you are allowed to play servers and they are back online kept by community.
Oh, right. Oh, yeah, I recall that. I actually wrote about that on Strategy and Wargaming some time ago. But now that you talk about that, I remembered recent news about the game called Myth. I'm not sure if you guys played it. Like, it was the original game from Bungie. It was an RTS game of the late 90s called Myth. Like, it was one of the first 3D RTS games. And the game has the game is again not abandoned, right? Just ceased the development over 20 years ago. Recently, a mod came out that added a lot of new HD stuff to the game. Like it completely revamped the graphics of the game.
Yeah, but I heard about it. This is this type of game that I always wanted to play, but when I looked at the graphics, I was like, not today. It's not the time for today. And Jack, you?
I was gonna say, don't worry. In 5 years, Bungie will remake Myth as a battle royale.
Nice punch. Today I read that Bungie CEO stepped down, so maybe not.
Don't get me started. I've talked before in an episode with you about how much I love early Bungie and Halo and their projects before. But I think one of the best stories for that, which isn't something that I necessarily have a lot of experience with, but does kind of hit you in the heartstrings, Adam, is Beyond All Reason, because that was originally Total Annihilation mod. And if you actually look at the Total Annihilation wiki, Beyond All Reason is built off the foundation of a total conversion mod that was built off of a previous total conversion mod that was built off of the vanilla game. So it's 3 steps removed as total conversions for the game, and now Beyond All Reason is its own. They actually took the Spring engine, because I know Al always refers to it as the Spring mod, is what it was initially called, I think, or the Spring project, and now the Spring engine is what powers Beyond All Reason. And so, I mean, that's probably the greatest success story there. The only other thing I can think of would be another game I don't have a lot of experience with, but StarCraft 2 is a game that we've had guests on talking about how much they loved. So many developers quote StarCraft 2 as being a massive experience for them, and I would want to go back and play StarCraft 2. But the game, I know back in 2020 they announced they weren't going to update the game anymore, and the game is sitting at 2,300 mods on CurseForge, and I'm sure it's more on Nexus, so it seems to be kept alive by the community since then.
Yeah. So yeah, that's basically you touched the next topic I want to talk about, and basically when you consider a game being abandoned and when you consider like be simply the development on it simply stopped. Like how would you basically split one from the other, Jack?
I think it's different based on the time period, right? Because we used to make games as products that were temporary. We made games that had to have all of the content at launch or maybe a couple of patches, but they were released on CDs and ROM, or they released in a box that they shipped and you purchased at your local brick and mortar store. So the game had to, outside of maybe like a day one patch in the early 2000s, it had to have all the content it was going to have, and so they just stopped development on a game. These days, I wouldn't necessarily consider a game abandoned, but I think we all have an expectation, right, that developers release a game, and I think it's a better business strategy to make a game and continuously update it regardless, just because it's better for you as a developer and it's better for the players to continuously get new content. And we've stepped away from DLC more. I would call a game abandoned if the developer themselves reached a roadblock where they couldn't update the game anymore and they had to leave it behind. I wouldn't necessarily say they abandoned it just because they stopped updates, but it happens, right? I played Elite Dangerous before on console, and Elite Dangerous was constantly doing massive updates every few years, completely converting the game mechanics. And they eventually reached a threshold where they just had to drop all console support because Frontier, who also makes the Jurassic World games, they just didn't have the development power to work on multiple platforms. So that game was abandoned. There's no content for that game, no modding scene because it's on console. And the game on PC has also had its population hurt because of that move. So that game was like halfway abandoned. But another game that may have just ended support, like StarCraft, after 20 years, was not abandoned.
And Nudo, what do you think? Because you often you will need to say like abandon / stop development. So would you distinguish it one from the other, or?
I think the game development on the game used to be rather simple, right? So it used to be a finished product. You had to get it out because it had to be on a physical disc, and it was extreme. You could still update games back then, but it was really hard and really convoluted to do so, and expensive as well because you had to ship those updates out as well sometimes. But other than that, how today in 2025, what I would consider a game abandoned if the game promised features to the community and never delivered on those. So if a game, let's say it goes into early access and says, oh, on the roadmap for version 1.0, we have this set of features. And if those set of features are not complete and the game is still launched as a 1.0 release, I would consider the game abandoned. Or, if it releases on 1.0 and development ceases after that, of course. The other thing I would say is just like downright stopping developing the game and doing nothing else, right? So they just disappear. And I remember a game that came out in 2014, I think, called Towns, which is a sort of isometric Dwarf Fortress-esque like game. So it was an indie title back then. The game had a lot of potential, had a very cool art style. People seem to love it, and suddenly, like the game the developing team just disappeared. Like they never said anything. They just stopped showing up to work one day, and like something must have happened. But there was never any disclosure on that or any closure on that, so they just disappeared. I would call that game abandoned as well. Today is very complicated to say what an abandoned game is because oftentimes you go to Steam reviews and people have the feeling that a game is abandoned and in fact it still isn't, or it's finished but this is not getting constant updates. People will just think, oh, like it hasn't been updated in 3 years, so it must mean the developers abandoned it. Maybe not. Maybe it's just a finished product. And then you have like update that just came out of nowhere for games that were seemingly abandoned as well. I recall Expeditions. I think it's called Expeditions Rome. Just recently, out of the blue, just launched a new update for the game, and the other one was War on the Sea. Also launched a small patch, like 2 or 3 years after the last one, without announcing anything. So it's such a gray area right now. So what can you consider a game abandoned? Like what is it, the finished product in a video game? I think that also leads us to a lot of problems I really don't want to get into in this podcast about consumer rights and consumer protection. It's something I'm very passionate about. But yeah, I would agree with Jack. I think that if you're not delivering on a project that you set out to do, if you're launching a 1.0 release that it clearly isn't finished, because like people are not stupid. Just because you swap a number and said it's a finished product doesn't mean it is. Especially if there's that previous expectation that the game is going to be something and it ends up not being that thing you were expecting. I think that's a lot of ways you can say that a game is abandoned or isn't abandoned, but I can't give you a definitive answer. I know I've been rambling a lot, so it's very hard to answer that.
But so what I would say is that I would say that okay, it's really it's really not easy to declare if game is abandoned in terms of like updates, if they are coming like every year or every month, or they basically stop for a while. But I guess there's this clearer line when we can say that the game is for sure abandoned. And for me, for example, when the game simply due to the I don't know, Windows update stopped working and there is no update fixing it. Or the games requires servers to run, even for single player, and servers are down. So isn't it like being abandoned game? You cannot play it anymore. Okay, at least without some community patches that were fixing servers or something like that. Yeah, this is like the point of this of game being abandoned for me. But there's also this feeling way. So like every episode we talked about Paradox games, and there's this one Paradox game that came out like 3-4 years ago or 5 years ago about Rome. Are you aware of this game?
Yeah.
Imperator Rome or something like that?
Mm-hmm.
And like I know they basically they finished development on this game, but like for me, I really felt they basically abandoned it due to the low player count. Like, do you feel it the same way? Maybe you feel it different or something like that.
I think there's an expectation that Paradox games are supported on the long run, and that's a sort of like blood pact between the community and Paradox that when you're buying a Paradox game, you're getting the sort of like the really basic experience, and then they're gonna keep updating it over the course of several years. That happened with Crusader Kings, Europa Universalis, Hearts of Iron, and it's still happening currently with those games. What happened with Imperator was that the game came out, really didn't sell all that well, and like they never delivered on that blood pact they have with the community, right, of improving the base game, because the base game was actually very bare bones as well, so there wasn't anything special there. So there was this expectation that Paradox was going to continuously work on it and make it better, and they didn't. Like, they delivered the base. Is it fair to say that they misled their customers? I don't think so, because the game was released as 1.0 and you knew what you were buying into. But again, like I said before, like there was that expectation, and the fact that it has a 1.0 on the version of the game really doesn't mean that it is the 1.0 version, if you know what I'm saying. On the other side, you have games like going back to Age of Empires, like Age of Empires 2. If Age of Empires 2 Definitive Edition sees development today, I wouldn't say the game was abandoned. I think the game is perfectly fine as is. It's pretty amazing. It's very solid. The game has been finished for well over 20 years now. So yeah, again, like it's extremely complicated.
What the game needs to be in order for the community to keep it alive. So my question is, why there are games like Command and Conquer that we talked about, FJ Empires you talked about, the community keeps alive, and on the other side, okay, Myth has this mod, but I don't know, there are some old strategy games that are really great and community simply doesn't care about them in terms of outputting mods or something like that. So, like, what the games need to do in order for it to be community driven at some point? Jack, what do you think?
I think it'd be interesting if you did like a cross-reference between the games that were most supported and still played today, like Age of Empires 2 and StarCraft 2, and what those games might have accomplished at the time, just enough to have some form of staying power. What I mean by that is we've had conversations before. I've been on episodes where Al has mentioned to Tim, I think, talking about how maybe it was Total Annihilation came out the same year as Dark Reign was the other game, and they both had very similar mechanics, but because of the time of the year that they had released and the possibly just the way they were marketed, Total Annihilation is what we still talk about today. And Dark Reign, I think is what it was called, wasn't. Al actually thinks that between the two of them, Dark Reign should have taken off more because it had some mechanics that Total Annihilation did not. And I think that's interesting, right? Is maybe Age of Empires 2 is only played so much because it just had particular staying power over something else that year. Or I'm completely wrong in this sentiment. And both Age of Empires 2 and StarCraft 2 just happen to be like chess. They feature a very core designed gameplay loop that is irreplaceable, and that's why games like Command and Conquer and Total Annihilation need to have these total conversion mods that eventually become things like Beyond All Reason.
Yeah, I totally get it. So basically, if the game is like finished in sense, it's really hard to add anything new because if you do, you break a balance. Basically, you cannot. Yeah, it's really good point. Then, for example, StarCraft 2, I guess StarCraft 1 and 2, basically, they don't have any mods. Am I right? They are pretty pure.
They have mods, but the interesting thing is before, like I mentioned, StarCraft 2 doesn't have any update support, and I mentioned there's 2,300 mods on CurseForge. Scrolling down that page, at least what I see are graphics mods or unit replacement, where they're just changing out the assets of the game. They're not necessarily affecting the balance or changing the actual gameplay loop, because those things are irreplaceable.
Yeah, and on the other side, there are games like Heroes of Might and Magic that basically they're creating new cities and new campaigns, because basically it's also another point that Heroes of Might and Magic, okay, it's being played on tournaments, but it's not strictly a multiplayer game. It's more or less single player with multiplayer components, so maybe that's a case for it. That's why there are so many mods in this game.
For the game to be kept alive for that long, I think it really needs to have a couple of things. The first one would have to be the capability of being modded. That's number one. Like without that, some modern games cannot be kept alive just because of that fact. And I think that's a shame, because you have a lot of solid games that could have had this kind of experience and life cycle, but never will, because they never had it mod support. The other one that I think it's fundamental should be not a multiplayer community, but an online community built around the game. So you need to have a substantial amount of interest on the game. At least a very dedicated subsect of the strategy players need to be invested in it to justify working on it. An example of this would have to be the original XCOM rework that's constantly being updated. Like that game has been out since I had like 2 years. I was 2 years old or something like that, or 1 year old. And the game is still being updated, or this mod is still being updated with that. Like I think it's called the UFO edition, something like that. It basically is the biggest mod, and it keeps the game updated and running on modern systems as well. So there's clearly an interest in that too. And the other part would be, I think the game, to be kept alive for as long as possible, needs to have some sort of cultural relevance to the video gaming scene. Not sure if this makes a lot of sense, but hold your thoughts with me. So you have games like, say, Half-Life. Now straying a bit away from strategy games, like Half-Life spawned a couple of other interesting games with mods, like Counter-Strike being the largest one as well. So, but Half-Life was a very important game in and of itself. It's like the game was very revolutionary to first-person shooters. And in strategy games, you also had that with games like Age of Empires was a pretty solid. No, I wouldn't say solid, but it was almost foundational to the way RTS would be played going forward on that. And there's a reason why, like Jack was saying, that you very rarely touch the balance on that game, and you very rarely touch on the original mechanics, because it's like chess. Like, it's perfect as is, and yeah, you can tweak it a bit here and there. You can make a unit more powerful, maybe a bit, like go up a number, go down a number, but you never really do extreme changes on the game. So I think these would be the three most important aspects of those. Another example, just to solidify my argument, would be Doom, because like Doom has to be the most modded game of all time as well. So, and it has everything. Like, it has a subsect of the gaming community that loves the game. It had a very active multiplayer scene, and it's very cultural relevant even to this day. Like to the point that if there's a very important mod for Doom coming out, you can see it on the news every day. Sometimes even in mainstream news websites, not just gaming websites. So yeah, like it has to be a perfect storm for a game to be as relevant as StarCraft, like Age of Empires, Doom, Half-Life, Counter-Strike, something like that. So yeah, I think it's a very elusive idea. It's a very it's very hard to pinpoint what exactly makes a game great. But again, like Myth, why is Myth being kept alive as well? Because it's one of the first 3D games, and the community built around that. Like you're saying, Total Annihilation is another example as well. Like Heroes of Might and Magic too. There's a reason why we're getting a new Heroes of Might and Magic coming out today. Dawn of War, another one that I think that after playing it for so long, it's amazing. I went on vacations for a couple of days, and I haven't played for these last couple of days, and I was always thinking about, man, I wish I could play Dawn of War right now, which is really interesting to me because I'm the kind of guy that is always looking for the next modern thing coming out, and I always like new mechanics and see what the developers are trying out. And wanting to constantly go back to, let me play just a little bit more of Dawn of War. And then coming to the realization that this is over 20 years old meant that maybe they have done something special with that as well. So yeah, very elusive, very hard to pinpoint.
You know, guys, for me, the most astonishing thing is that when they are not modding a game, but when the community is recreating the engine the game is based on. And it happened, I guess, for Morrowind, as far as I remember. I know it's not a strategy game, but it happens. I guess this was the same for Total Annihilation. That's why, that's how the bar basically came up to be produced. But I looked at the Wikipedia and I noticed, for example, Heroes of Might and Magic has its own engine recreated. Games like Fallout, this is like Dungeon Keeper. I've never played this game, but I can see fans recreated the whole engine. Like, imagine the community is so passionate about the game that they're gathering and creating the game from a scratch, and that's for me like astonishing. Like I can't even comprehend how much work went into this project.
Yeah, I was going to mention that my experience for that, especially outside of strategy games, to contribute to this was Bethesda games, which usually sit at the top of Nexus mods, and they're so easily moddable and accessible, and they have a great support for that. The interesting thing to contribute here, though, is despite how high up a game like Skyrim or Morrowind sits, and the fact that their engines are used for total conversions and the like, I would consider it interesting how the conversation for the developers, Bethesda themselves, they talk about Skyrim in retrospect, and they actually wish that they worked on that game 10 years longer with updates and DLC after its release, because when the game came out in 2011, they, especially in their corner of the industry for these open world RPGs, they just didn't have an expectation of supporting a game for 10 years like something like StarCraft and World of Warcraft does for Blizzard. So they, in retrospect, wish they would have worked on that game longer. They constantly, there's an argument that they move backwards in their games and their game mechanics and how they build their worlds, so people are encouraged to mod them more. Their most recent title, Starfield, has come out, and they've essentially butchered their modding scene with decisions that they've made. And because of that, it's this interesting situation in comparison where Skyrim received all of its DLCs within a year, and it's now been 2 years since Starfield has come out, and they've only delivered one of the DLCs that they've promised, in air quotes, and people are patiently waiting for the next DLC, which is now said to not even come out until next year. And they also are dealing with a problem with paid mods, and the entire scene is butchered. And so my point is, it's almost as if that game is going through its life cycle feeling like it's been abandoned by a developer that regularly updates their games with constant DLCs, at least for a year afterwards, and usually support the modding scene so well. And now we're seeing a developer kind of take a back seat on that and butcher the modding scene in a way and handicap them there. Another thing I wanted to point out for the conversation we had before, especially about Paradox games, how do both of you feel about City Skylines? Because we've talked about City Skylines 2 here on the channel, and we talk about and acknowledge that City Skylines 2 is a higher quality version of the first game that has been lobotomized of certain features. City Skylines 1 is currently sitting at almost 400,000 items in general for save games and mods and buildings on the Steam Workshop alone. That game is going to continue to receive support because it's the game that people are probably going to prefer to play for a very long time. But City Skylines 2 has come out and it's not going to have that much content in its workshop for a very long time, let alone require DLCs and constant updates from Paradox to reach that point. But they haven't announced it, but it's basically been confirmed that they're no longer going to support City Skylines 1 with their own official updates either.
Due to the reason that there are so many mods of City Skylines 1 and they are adding so much, it's really hard for the developer of the game to push it to some limit that the community didn't do. So for example, the roads, they created like this huge crossroads and something like that, and developer is in this position that basically for the second installment of the game to be as good as the first one, need to include some of the incorporate some of the creations that are made by fans. And the expectations were so high due to the mods that basically it's not possible for City Skylines 2 to be as good or as playable or as known as the first part. That's why I noticed that Paradox learned from the mistakes, and when they are, for example, right now developing Europa Universalis 5, they are introducing some really interesting features that weren't really like talked by community, like the completely new mechanics. Because and this is the issue in City Skylines 1, because basically community created so many new mechanics, it's really hard for the producer to come up with something new at this point. That's what I see. Like this is what I saw is they added so much into this game that like what the producer could like do in this case, like they could maybe made different City Skylines, but second installment already it has already been created by a community, and that's a problem because how can you like overtake community involvement in the project if first of all you need to make money, so you need to come up with something interesting, and second of all community, like if you created a second installment of a game, I heard there are mods that fix some of the issues that producer made. So this is the issue. You see, like this is kind of like this on the spectrum of community involvement. This is on this bad end. Maybe the mods are good, but on the other hand, it kind of destroyed the need for any new game in this series. You know what I mean?
I agree with you. I think the game like City Skylines is such a solid experience that you don't need City Skylines 2. Like if you have all the mods installed, what else do you really need? I think it's there's a success case that I recalled when you guys were talking about it, which is not sure like as being the resident wargamer of this podcast, I have to bring like Armored Assault into the into the conversation. It's not a strategy game, but I think it's a great example of a game that managed to overcome this difficulty. And which was Armored Assault 2 had a lot of mods. Not sure if you guys played it or if you guys are aware, but it's a very realistic first-person shooter. Extremely realistic, is used as a basis for virtual battle space, which is used for military training, all that. So, but the point here is like there were thousands and tens of thousands of mods for Armored Assault 2. Very complete, extremely well made mods, incredible. You had so much content there. It was very hard to find something that didn't exist for that game. Actually, it was that good, the modding scene. Armored Assault 3 came out too. I remember thinking this exact thing. Was like, oh man, with Armored Assault 3 coming out, how are they gonna support? Like, how is the community going to be moving forward with the amount of mods that's already available at the moment? And what they did was they just like reinvented the game. Like the game Armored Assault 3 is such a massive improvement in when it comes to like it has a much better graphics, much better physics simulation, has a lot more mechanics. Like there's a lot more granularity when it comes to weapon handling, vehicle control, etc. And better yet, they knew the community really loved their editor, so they upgraded the editor a lot. And the major change between Armored Assault 2 and 3, aside from all the visual stuff and the engine stuff, was the fact that the editor was now 3D and in real time, so you can basically act like a RTS commander and you can spawn new objectives. Like, people like to roleplay a lot in that game. So if you had such a powerful editor on one end that it brought a lot of new value into the title itself, that people just felt compelled to move to that. And what you saw happening was that the major mods that existed for Armored Assault 2 ended up being ported to Armored Assault 3. Like the amount of stuff that existed in 2, like it's now in 3 as well. And I'm sure they're gonna have the same problem when it comes to Armored Assault 4 too. So how are we gonna support a game that how are we gonna be able to fit this much content into the game? And I hope that they can come up with something that motivates people to cross over, because that's what City Skylines didn't have. Like, what do you need in City Skylines 2 that you don't have in City Skylines 1 already? Right. It's very hard. You can do that with other Paradox games. So, like, I can think of 100 of different ways to improve Europa Universalis and Hearts of Iron and Crusader Kings, but like City Skylines, it's a city management game, and Cities 1 was pretty much on point.
Yeah, so you see, like, for example, in his Hearts of Iron 3, they added these trees. And this was like a, I would say, a brilliant idea, because I don't know if you play here Hearts of Iron 2 or 3. It's pretty similar to the fourth part, but they introduced completely new mechanic that is like, it wasn't even like in any mods, there wasn't anything like that, and it created a new branch of community involvement in terms of creating the trees for every imaginary country. For even like there is a mod for Warhammer, so they're basically it's like a map with scenes that being remodeled, and they added like these trees that corresponds to Warhammer lore history. So you see, like, they basically added this huge mechanic to the game that basically maybe that pushed people to move to this new part. And this is again the issue, because the Skyrim editor was so open, and people also kind of hacked the game. They went into the scripts and started to write the code themselves for the game, that basically they created everything they could in the Skyrim. And the Starfield, when it came out, there is also a second issue, because the game is, as with every game, the budget were bigger, the models, the whole 3D graphics for the game it's much harder for a person to mod this game, because it's like the budgets, and due to the budget constraint, due to the people labor, it requires much more work to mod this game. So that's another reason why it's not so popular in terms of modding as Skyrim, except for butchering by creating a mod shop. That's this idea is so bad that I cannot even comprehend like what they have done with it. But again, this is like, and this is, I guess, the case with Skylines, the City Skylines 2 also, because okay, they created the first game, you can mod everything. They created second game, and again, the budget was bigger. It's not so easy to mod. So what incentivized people have to move to this part? And with Arma, that Nuno brought up, basically they thought about it. They created even better editor, and they pushed people to even like to mod their mods to be played in the third installment. This is really interesting. So, guys, to end the subject about the community-driven games, what's your favorite mod in any game you played? Let's brought it up.
It's the Medieval Kingdoms 1212 mod, which basically brings up Total War Attila into the Middle Ages. I mean, Attila is basically almost like entering Middle Ages, but you know what I'm saying. Like, you reach the high and low Middle Ages. So it has a lot of new factions, hundreds of units, has a lot of I think it even has a campaign at the moment, but I would say this is a mod I have played the most. Basically, just to create my own battles, not necessarily to play the campaign, but just because of the amount of units it has and the way the battles it allows you to create. And the other one would also have to be a mod for Total War Attila, but doesn't exist anymore. Which was a Game of Thrones mod that I really cannot remember the name at the moment. But again, I did exactly the same thing that I did in 12.12, which is to recreate battles I saw on the series using the mod. I'm not very much of I'm not necessarily a great mod player. I just use mods to recreate things I cannot get from the base game itself. Since I spend a lot of time reviewing games, it's hard to have the free. I know this is like a first world concern, but it's hard to find time to experiment with mods, which is a shame. Now, I'm curious to know about Jack.
I'll have two as well. My first is a mod from Minecraft called Mine Colonies. So for anybody who's uninitiated to that, it is a mod that it adds in NPCs to the game, and it becomes a town building game where you interact with individual NPCs. They tell you what materials they need, and it gives a whole new flavor to the gameplay loop of the game. So I'm sure everybody who's familiar with Minecraft understands the basic gameplay loop, but it essentially just gives you more of a reason to actually continuously acquire the materials that you're acquiring throughout the game, and then invest them into certain spots, and then you actively see your town grow. So you're not necessarily placing every block yourself, but it has a built-in economy system that works off of trade and goods, and it's a very complex system. The houses have multiple tiers, the buildings multiple tiers, and the mod is massive. It has like 9 or 10 or 12 or 14 different variants that you can just choose for your town that completely changes the entire aesthetic of your town. There's decorative features. It's essentially a large-scale city builder in a first-person perspective, where you have to collect the materials yourself, and you have an entire survival crafting game on its own. But then there's a town building aspect. It reminds me a lot of like Kingdom Come Deliverance, for anybody who's played that DLC that they had. But that one was much harder to me. My second mod would be a mod for Skyrim, and it's honestly just the alternate start mod for Skyrim, the one that removes the open tutorial quests and just lets you drop into the world and choose where you want to be. Because without it, I feel like so many other mod lists and experiences that I've had in modded Skyrim wouldn't exist. Just being able to choose where I want to be and set myself up to actually immerse myself in the game again. So
Okay, interesting choices, guys. Regarding Total War, basically I didn't mention this because I feel that there's not enough mods in this series due to the fact there are so many games in it. Because there's like, I don't know, 20 Total War games at this point. So, and when you create a mod, you wish to be alive for quite a while. And when there was a point that there was new game every year, I guess that's why there wasn't so many mods at some point. But of course, there are right now because Attila has mods. I heard about them too. And regarding Minecraft, basically they made the first-person town builder out of the first-person survival game. This is really interesting. From me, there will be two mods, and the first one is the Knight and Merchants remake. So Knight and Merchants is a strategy game that's known in my region of Europe, and it's maybe not niche, but it wasn't known worldwide. And basically the company created a game, then they created a DLC for it, and then abandoned it because the DLC was broken. And community recreated the whole DLC. They added new campaigns, new units, new AI to the game. They even added a proper online multiplayer mode. So basically they created a completely new game out of this old one. But you can still play the original missions, so that's why I love it, and and my father and me, we played it all the time. And the second mod that I already talked about is also for Heroes of Might and Magic, so HD mod for this game. It's a simple mod, but again, Ubisoft tried to make HD version of Heroes of Might and Magic 3. Basically, the game was a disaster. It had so many errors. You cannot play it anymore, even on iPad, because it's broken. The game crashes every couple of minutes, so it's really bad. And fans and community created HD mod themselves, and it's amazing. It plays like charm. You can play on the modern systems on any resolution you want. You can scale everything. It's a basic mod, so it's called Heroes of Might and Magic RG or something like that. Unfortunately, you need to go through Russian sites in order to find it, the US version. But again, that's a basic mod, so I really advise you to play it if you are in love with Heroes of Might and Magic game. So guys, thank you for the discussion today.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for having me as well.
Thank you for listening to the podcast. Please press subscribe button, and let's meet again in the next episode of Critical Moles. See you guys.